11 years old, it just occurred to her, it's good to come to here, because aren't we all going to be under here all day? And it kind of reminds us that there's a certain amount we want to be doing while we're still on this side of the earth. Here, 12-year-old said? 11. Yeah.
So would y'all want your like room to be like a crib? You know, it's like a whole lot.
There's so much to say. How do I prioritize? He was anonymous for many of his early decades. He actually moved to a small town and told that when he started learning with a local Rav, and the Rav realized I'm learning across from me is a 20-year-old Gadol Hador. He swore him to secrecy. He didn't want people to know. He wanted to just be, left alone so he could sit and learn Torah. But lest you think he was a dispassionate, removed person, the story. What's that? That's okay. He said that once he came to the Rav and he said, Mendel the Blacher, the shoemaker, is sick, we should go visit him. And the Rav said, okay, how do you know this and why is it so significant? He said, trust me. They went, the wife of Mendel answered the door. She was shocked that the Rav of the town actually came to visit her husband. He said, I heard that Mendel's sick. And she said, yeah. He said, well, he's a very chashuv person. I want to come visit. I want to be Bakar Chola. I want to do the mitzvah of Bikar Cholim. So he came. They visited him. They left. The Rav looked at the Chazon Ish afterwards and said, what was that about? He said, they're having Shalom Bayis problems. How did the Chazon Ish know this? We don't know. They're having Shalom Bayis problems. And indeed, the fact that the wife was looked at her husband like a nebuch, like he was a nobody. But from that point on, since the Rav of the town came to visit him, the Shalom Bayis improved. Because that was the level the Chazon Ish was operating on. He did chesed on a micro level. He knew everything going on with every person. He knew everything going on in Shas. And he cared. When he published the Chazon Ish, everybody realized that he was a gadol and nobody knew who he was. When he moved to Eretz Yisrael, his Rebbe Rav Chaim Moshe Grzensky, who we actually davened by in Vilna, his kever, he said an Aryeh, a lion, has moved to Eretz Yisrael, and he came and he was uncompromising at a time in Torah, and a time that everybody was compromising. People said, you have to rely on the Heter Mechira for Shemitah, and you can't really, the boys have to go work, they can't really learn in the yeshiva. He said, nonsense. His big idea was to go and spread Torah all over Eretz Yisrael, and he sent people, some more successful, some less, but he really did. He built a world of Torah. The idea that we sit full time and learn. All of my married children, all my sons and sons-in-law who are learning, they're learning full time in Kolo. That's an enterprise the Chazon Ish started. The Steipler Gaon, the Panovitcher Rebbe, the Rav Shach, they were instrumental in establishing this. This was new. This was not like the world in Europe. They realized that the Torah existence was at stake, was very much threatened in the world, and they put it over. In the famous story, near the end of his life, he died in 1953, shortly there before, there was a famous meeting. Ben Gurion, who was Prime Minister of the new state of Israel, had come to visit him. And at issue was the draft. Should you have the Yeshiva Bachrim exempted? Should you have the girls serve in Shut Leumi, which is the national service? The Chazon Ish held nothing less than it was Yehareg Vayavor. He told his nieces, the Steipler's two daughters, Rav Chaim's sisters, that if they were older and if they should be drafted, they should actually be willing to die and not go in, because it was understood that it was sakanas nefashos. Your nefesh was at risk. People went into the army in those days, and almost 90% of them just went off the derech. It was that influential. Very hard for a young person to maintain his religious life when he's surrounded by all that foreign influence.
What about now?
It's a similar discussion. People go into the army from, they come out most of the time not from. Some stay strong.
Is that a good question for Obama?
Sure. It was related to what we were talking about on the bus. Yeah. So he met with Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion said at one point, he gave the famous metaphor of two camels passing, and one has a load, one doesn't have a load. Who goes first? The camel carrying the load. We're carrying the load of tradition. We have to pass. You have to give us the exemption. They did. That was the status quo agreement. But now they were trying to renege on the agreement. The Chazon Ish said, if we want to draft the boys, we'll send our policemen and our soldiers into the yeshivas, and they'll point guns to your students, and we'll tell them that we're gonna draft them. They're gonna have no choice. Chazon Ish said yes, and our students will bare their hearts. They'll open their shirts, they'll bare their hearts, and they'll tell your soldiers to shoot, and they won't be able to. Because our students have behind them Hashem, and they have the power of the Torah and our tradition of thousands of years, and they're not gonna give way. Anyway, it turned out that at least in the time being, that solution subsided. It's reissued, it's resurfaced, and it's surfacing right now again. What's going to be with the future of Torah is certainly part of the struggle for the soul of the state. The Chazon Ish was somebody who he was sickly, never had children. He looked like a gust of wind would carry him away. Don't lean on a tomb. It's tempting in a basic faros, but you have to be really careful here. There's lots of stuff, especially when you're around tzaddikim. There's remember the Satmar Rebbe felt that nobody should come to basic faros except if you're really a gadol and you knew what was going on here. There's kabbalistic things going on, klipos and other things that have great significance. He was the strongest man of the last century. Somebody asked if anybody really learned Kabbalah. Steinman said, yeah, the Chazon Ish learned Kabbalah. He really learned Kabbalah. He really learned Shas. Who really knows Shas? Chazon Ish did. Chazon Ish would think through every shaila, every issue carefully and thoroughly, every posik. He really left no stone unturned in a way that was quite unique. And I'm just getting started. I could go on and on, but I'm not going to do that. Right near him is the Stipler going. A couple down, we'll get to when the girls leave. And the Stipler Gaon was his brother-in-law. When he published Shari Tfunos, the Chazon Ish read the book and said, "Ooh, this is the shidduch for my sister." He'd never met him before. This is the shidduch for him, and that's how the shidduch was made, because he learned the book. And the Stipler followed the Chazon Ish a year later. In 1934, he moved to Bnei Brak. He was scary. Lazarus, the former Rosh Yeshiva of Derech, used to describe going to him. He was scary. If you remember at lunch the other day, Eli Lewin told the story about him. He was deaf. He had to speak louder, right what he had. But he was also the real thing. He was shy, like his son, Rav Chaim, by disposition, not shunned public life. But public life found him because he was a gadol. And he rose to it. His greatest memory, though, his greatest achievement, he felt, was that when he was conscripted into the Russian army in World War I, he refused to violate any halachas, and when he refused to be machal Shabbos, they court-martialed him and they put him in two rows of soldiers who he had to pause by each row. Each one of them beat him mercilessly, and he never buckled. He said that was his greatest accomplishment, his opportunity to show how devoted he was to Hashem under adversity.
To break Shabbos for the army, is that not pikuach nefesh?
No. It's buckling to him in that event. It's not pikuach
There's a
nefesh.
story in the Chaim's book with the Chazon Ish. They asked him to pick up a rifle one time
Okay.
and shoot, and he said no. And so one of the soldiers pointed a gun at him and said, like, if you don't pick this up, then I'm going to shoot you.
Yeah.
And he picked it up with his right hand. He was a lefty, as a shino, and he shot, and it landed like right on target.
That's interesting. I don't know that story. Thanks for that.
That's in the Chaim's book.
Yeah. They lived together because they were so poor. The families lived together. That's how. That's how. Yeah. That's how. Once the Stipler going, his shirt tore, and he had nothing to wear, so he called the yeshiva to his house and they gave sheriff from under the blankets, and the students thought he was sick. But okay, they lived life in a different level altogether. Yeah, try to get close to being the figurehead of Klal Yisrael. He's distinguished on so many levels. There's a nice story. If you want to read about the Gedolim, there's a book written by one of the long-sitting members of the Knesset named Rav Shlomo Lawrence called In Their Shadow. In Hebrew it's called B'Mechitzasam. And he has a nice story about Rav Shach. It was a snowy day in Yerushalayim, and Rav Lawrence, the Knesset member, was going to visit the Briskerov in Yerushalayim, in Bris Kolel. And he saw from a distance, it was a stormy day, nobody was out, but one figure was out, and it was very odd. He was dancing in the snow. And he just, what are you doing dancing in the snow? Go inside and have some hot cocoa, but what are you doing dancing in the snow? And Rav Shach didn't realize that anybody could see him. But what had happened, the end of the story was that he had gone in with a special chiddush that he'd learned in his learning. And he wasn't sure about it, so he went to the Brisker Rav, and the Brisker Rav liked it. And he was so thrilled to the core that when he left the Brisker Rav's house, he had to do a dance. Right? And it's like one of those. It's like a real story of like the Simcha of Torah. Like that's the real, like not for show, not for kiruv, like but just the real thing. Like he delighted in Torah, and that he could say a chiddush. We're supposed to say chiddushim. The Ramban, sorry, I can't resist in this week's parsha, but last week's parsha, excuse me, yesterday's parsha, he said the Nisim, the whole long bits at the very end of the Kriya yesterday. Who heard it in Shul? Kriyas Torah in Shul yesterday. So you have the long bits we also read in Hanukkah. Each of the 12 tribes brought their own special tributes that turned out to be identical with one another, and they initiated them. And Hashem saw it, accepted it, and said, "This, what you thought of in service of me, will now become halacha." And in fact, that became because these great figures, Nachshon ben Aminadav is most famous from Yehuda. Nachshon dove into the Yamsu first. He initiated this tribute to Hashem. It was Shloshim Me'ah, Mishkala, right? The 130. That was the Erev Rav, right? That was their initiation. That's what Shlomo Melech brought in the first temple. That's what the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, the Men of the Great Assembly, brought in the second temple. And the Navi Yechezkel says in the third base of Mikdash, it'll also be brought, the same tribute, because they had this idea. They were mechadesh. They had an idea. The Ramban points out in this week's parsha. Also, we're going to be learning about Pesach Sheni. They were also mechadesh. And he brings out soon at the end of the Midbar, we'll read about how the tribe of Menashe was concerned that Bnot Shlofchad inherited their father's portion and they married out, then portions of the tribe of Menashe would actually go to another tribe. Should they only, and they initiated, maybe they should only marry people from their own tribe of Menashe, and Hashem agreed. And these are examples of places where people, through their own L'Shem Shamayim initiative, maybe, David, on some level it relates to the piece we were talking about on the bus that you showed me, that the individual has a role and a voice. When he's in Torah and he's doing L'Shem Shamayim, Hashem can actually hear him, and that's what Rav Shach experienced that day. That was that digression. Rav Shach was, by the old world, he married the niece of his Rebbe, Rav Yisrael Salman Meltzer, never missed learning. When all the days he went on shidduchim and after engagement and before the marriage, he never missed a seder. The only one seder he missed was his wedding night. The next morning, his chavrusa thought, okay, this morning I'm going to take off. 9 o'clock in the morning, boom, boom, boom on the door. Rav Shach was there. Where are you? No, time to learn. Right? That was now everybody goes to every wedding.
Super Bowl.
Yeah, I forgot.
This is Rav Shach with you?
This is Rav Shach. Rav Elazar Menachem Man Shach. Gadol Ador. He's known for being very strong in his views. He criticized the settler movement very strongly. He said that he felt that the right wing, the Dati-Leumi ideology, was intended to provoke the nations, and we don't need that kind of attention. Since Yitzchak Avinu, we quietly go about doing our business with bitachon. The Kadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, and it's not our job to land ourselves on the front page of the New York Times every day. So he was vocal against, in opposition to the idea, not to the people. What's that?
Was he one of many people who were against the movement, or
he articulated what many felt. That was his way. He was when he felt he had to fight Milchem Torah, he did so. Not because he was divisive. People accused him of being divisive. It was very unfair. He was a big Baal Chesed, big Oav Yisrael, and really brought people together. But when he felt that something had to be spoken about and had to be Torah had to be defended, he did not mince words.
He didn't think that people had to do their part to keep the land that the Arabs were trying to take.
He felt that the path to Geula was through tshuva, through tikkun amidos, through learning Torah, which is really the normative mainstream view. He didn't initiate this. This is the view of most of the post-game. In fact, the settler movement has no real gadol on their side when they claim that Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook supports their project in settling the West Bank and Gaza and the Golan Heights and all that. He was not alive for any of this. Argument can go either way. It may have been that he would not have supported it, and his son was not a gadol. Tzvi Yehuda Cook. He was a charismatic figure, but he was not a gadol. And so he was outspoken about that because they broke really from the traditional approach to Mashiach. He, even more famously, spoke out against the Lubavitcher Rebbe, not because of personal enmity or anger. He had no venom, and when the Rebbe grew sick, he had the yeshiva in Panovich actually say Tehillim for the Rebbe, and people were surprised. They said, "Oh, but I thought you opposed Rav Schneerson and everything." He said, "No, I have nothing personal against him, and I daven that he should have a refuah shlema. I also daven that he should make tshuva from this messianic disaster." that he's created. He said that he paskined that, in the 1950s. I read it in history. There's a line that the new, at the time, 1950s, the new Lubavitcher Rebbe had written about the role of the Rebbe. He said was not even Avizaraya de Avodah Zarah. It wasn't even bordering Avodah Zarah. It was outright Avodah Zarah. He elevated the role of the Rebbe. That was before the messianic aspect. And later in the 70s and 80s, when the Rebbe fomented a cult of messianism around himself and didn't stop it, he called for a boycott of all Chabad institutions and he was called divisive for it. But he was voicing what many of the other Gedolim had also felt. And it felt it needed to put a stop to all of this in the name of the Torah. It's not the first time in history that we've had this. We've had false messianism. We've had many episodes, all of them disastrous for Klal Yisrael, and has to be as much as possible stopped. But he really fought for Klal Yisrael, and he was a Baal Chesed. I mean, all the kids knew he was the candy man. You went to his house at all hours. You could get candy from him. When he was driven around, he didn't drive himself. When his driver once passed a guy selling watermelons, but the watermelon stand fell over. And the poor guy was like plotzing, trying to get the watermelons back in the stand. So Rav Shach insisted that his driver stop. He was an old man at the time. He got out and helped move the watermelons back on the stand. The guy could have the livelihood. And it was all of that all together, and misunderstood and unfairly.
Why misunderstood?
I'm saying because people heard his sharp critiques of the problems, and they thought, oh, he's anti-Chabad. He wasn't anti-Chabad, and he wasn't anti-Hasidus. He said he was actually opposed when they put quotas. Today, there's a situation in the yeshivas in Eretz Yisrael. We talked about this history where there is a quota system for the Sephardim in most of the Ashkenazi yeshivas, and it's a whole dynamic. We discussed it. I don't want to digress and get into it. It's a whole dynamic. It persists till today. It's terribly unfair. Rav Shach followed the Chazon Ish in opposing. He said it should not be determined based on Sephardi, Ashkenazi, Hasidish, Litvish. He said it's a meritocracy. If a student wants to learn Torah, we embrace him. It should make no difference whatsoever what his background is. And he said we have Hasidim in our yeshiva. When somebody said that in the end of days, the Vilna Gaon, who signed the Cherem originally against Hasidus in general, when the Vilna Gaon would, when you meet him in Olam HaEmes, so the Vilna Gaon would give Rav Shach a big handshake for his opposition to the messianic aspect of Chabad. Again, he wasn't against Chabad, but the messianism in Chabad. He said, the Vilna Gaon will shake my hand? He said, no, not the Vilna Gaon. He said, the Balatanya, the original Lubavitcher Rebbe, will shake my hand because of the strange direction that the movement has taken. It's a shady spot here. Somebody want to say a kapitel to Hillam? He built orphanages. He built orphanages in Lithuania. When these Holocaust orphans made their way to Eretz Yisrael from Tehran, they were called the Yaldei Tehran, but they weren't Persian, they were European, often from homes. He fought to have them placed in religious homes and lost against the dominant secular majority who set them all up on secular kibbutzim.
Zionist pigs.
I try not to resort to that, but it is important to realize that the struggle in Eretz Yisrael is very much over the soul of Klal Yisrael, and he's one of our fighters on the right side of the team. He built. That was yeah. I can tell you many more stories, but we're David Pavarski. These are big. Chatzkel Levinstein, I quoted, he drove to Tel Aviv with the curtains covering the the son is sort of his single son decided to survive. I don't know. I think when it comes to Gedolim, the more modest it is, the more fitting.
I think this is probably going to be okay.
I think we have to leave. Do you mind if we don't find out where you want to go? Let's try to find it. The Rebbitzin learned Orchot Tzadikim, one of the great Musar books, and it was actually opened on her bed when she was nifter. She, even when she was sick, she was somebody very much, was a certain neshama that you don't hear about, according to the essence of some of the Gedolim, that only comes along once in a lifetime. they're next to each other. So the Rebbetzins over there. I'll finish saying. Anyway, even when she was against doctor's orders, the people came to her. They flocked to her, and she went out to the balcony and to answer whatever they had, the questions they asked. She was somebody who had phenomenal memory, whose davening could last hours because she davened for everybody she ever met, remembered everybody's tefillah, and was once. She was once surprised when she learned that somebody had given birth. She said, "Oh, I'm still davening that they should get a shidduch." She had everybody. She had her father's mind, so she remembered everything. Rav Chaim, like his father, like the Seidler Gaon, was not somebody who wanted public life. He was a lamdan in the serious sense of the term. Learned in Lamza in Petach Tikva, and but when he was called to do it, you have to rise to the situation. He did. He filled the purpose in Klal Yisrael. He didn't rest. He wrote Sfarim on unusual subjects. He had a shita based on the Sefer Hasidim that we need every corner of the Torah to be explicated, and he did. He wrote a book famously on grasshoppers, and he was stumped on a certain species of grasshopper. And the story goes, and Stipler actually, to publicize the miracle, made sure they had a kiddush so people heard the story. The grasshopper hopped on his sefer, and he looked at me and said, "Oh, that's the answer," and wrote up the answer.
Did it extinct also?
He wrote a book called Derech Emunah, which is about Eretz Yisrael, about Mavulos Eretz Yisrael, about the mitzvahs of Tluis Ba'aretz, and it was able to take a topic that is not widely discussed in the poskim, that's of great relevance in the modern era, to know which parts are in Eretz Yisrael, which parts are not in Eretz Yisrael. Malo, he covered pretty much every topic in Shas. And was quiet and self-effacing. They had an open refrigerator policy.
Was he a big posek, or was he more of a lamdan?
He was a lamdan and a posek, and only laterally in his later years when he had to rise because everybody insisted that he did, was he the gadol hador. I mean, really distinguished. Everybody saw him as a gadol, but he didn't want the job. It's not like he was here.
So everyone said, like, be the gadol hador. He was like, no. And he was like, fine, I'll be the gadol hador.
Something to that effect. Something like that. We're going to be late. Let's go. We'll talk more about Rav Chaim and the Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin was the gentlest, kindest, most brilliant person in the world, kind of thing. But like she was an Earth Mother type. Like just everybody was there. She hugged everybody. I think I've told this. I don't know who I've told which stories to, but these are the ones that stand out because they're my favorites about her. There are many, and hers is a biography that I recommend strongly. I think I gave you in your reading list, Yosef. I told you to read it. It's a very down-to-earth biography. You don't feel that they're making stuff up. Like you just feel like she's a very real human being. She really was. Very much with people. She cared about everybody. She had like Sephardim, Ashkenazim, secular people came to her. There was a young woman who came who clearly was not religious, but she tried to dress the part, and she came and was walking on these streets, and a man came over and told her off. Dressed like that, coming to this neighborhood. And it was one of 2 times they said that anybody ever, the authors had done thorough research, and they said of everybody's testimonies about her, only 2 accounts of her ever getting slightly to her level of anger. She said she went over to the young woman, she put her arm around her, and she turned to the man and she said, "This woman is my guest, and everybody, it's known that everybody comes to our home, and our home is wide open to all of Klal Yisrael, except I have to say, you, sir, are not welcome in my house anymore." Yeah.
I would have killed myself.
Right. And the other time that somebody saw her angry was when a girl with a speaking impediment came with her in class, and she caught out of her, she was very sharp, she caught out of the corner of her eye, another girl sort of mimicking her. And she had a very I wouldn't want to be that other girl right now. Right?
I wouldn't want to be a girl either.
Yes, that also. But even that other girl right now.
Thank you, Jack.
But these are people who are just operating on a they just, everything was avodas Hashem. And she took in everybody. And not everybody's necessarily pleasant. And there was a woman from Beit Shemesh area came who was obnoxious and smelled bad. And loud and obnoxious, if I didn't mention obnoxious. And everybody avoided her. The Rebbetzin cuddled her, put her arms around her. The Rebbetzin was very neat, very orderly. But when it came to people, she let down her standards. She didn't care. And the woman at one point said, I'm tired, I'm tired, I can't stand up anymore. Rebbe says, you lie down in my bed. Would you give a smelly person your bed to lie down in? Okay, so, yeah, so she worked, she had different rules. She worked with. Yeah. And they, look, in general, all of Klal Yisrael. What's that? Oh, right here. Yeah.
Big house?
No, it was enlarged. We came. Look, it was there was a time when everybody just came in and out of the Gedolim's house, and today it's just become. It's much more difficult. There's much more demand. It's harder to get in. I remember once bringing one of my sons, and we got in line and we were waiting in line, and somebody last minute came and elbowed himself in and said, "Oh, I came." He also came from Beis Shemesh. He said, "I came all the way from Beis Shemesh, and I have to get in. I have to cut in line in front of everybody. You know, it's really important." One of these shticks, and he did. He got in ahead of us. We were the next one going in, and then immediately afterwards, the shamish who took care of everything peeked outside and said, "He apologizes, but the Rebbe can't see anybody else today." And my son was disappointed, but I turned to him and I said, "It's okay. Our schar is bigger." Meaning the guy who elbowed his way into, Rav Chaim's incorrectly, and in fact, we didn't make machlokas over it. That's more important than a bracha that you get from a gadol.